Hello and happy Easter to you. I hope it's a good day for you. And if today is part of a season of struggle for you, then I hope that some of what I share may lift your spirit and give you a little bit of a lift as you handle life's struggles. Today I'm assisted in the making of the preaching video by some glamorous assistants. Three or four flies are co-starring in this. And I'm learning to appreciate flies. It's taken me a while, but I've had some encouragement. And when you stop and look, they're actually really very beautiful. What's just stopped happening is a lot of bird song, and that's to do with the time of day we've reached. But you may hear blackcaps or some other birds singing in the background. So I've got the flies helping me. I've got the birds probably helping me. And I've also got a nice cast of trees and flowering plants to help me as well, perhaps about 30 species of those in the shot of the video, more or less. And I want to use all those things to assist me. So I'm welcoming the flies, the birds, the trees, and the flowering plants and everything else around me. Because I want you to join me in a happy confusion. And the subject is the resurrection of Jesus and its implications for us and for nature. And it starts with the confusion of the first people to whom the resurrection was revealed, the women, whom Luke mostly names, the apostles who initially didn't believe, but Peter still thought he'd check out the unlikely story, and goes away wondering to himself. And the ongoing fact that we wonder about this thing, the resurrection, because here's the thing we know, it's not natural, but then it's never been claimed to be a natural event. However, nature will provide us with a kind of a first step towards grasping what it means and the sense that it actually makes. So, in our readings, and if you haven't listened to our readings, can I encourage you to do that? But you'll find them for yourself if you want to, as the end of chapter 23 and the beginning of chapter 24 of Luke's book, the Gospel of Luke. And you'll find the rest as a collection of verses taken out of Paul's letter to his friends in Corinth, 1 Corinthians chapter 15. I've chopped around that because it's quite a long chapter, so the readings would be too long, I think, for our needs. So I've tried to just chop around to keep to a single thread there. So Paul, in writing to the Corinthians, uses not flies, but certainly plants as his illustration. And I love to use nature as illustration. Sometimes when I'm introducing people to some aspects of how birds live, I refer to eggs, and I say, you need to know that a bird is just the egg's way of making more eggs. That's what the bird is for. It's just a system the egg has for making more eggs. So there are always eggs of its type going down through the generations. And all I'm trying to do there, as I'm obviously trying to do with you now, is to say there may be more than one way of looking at things than what strikes us as initially the obvious way. And Paul uses the natural processes to illustrate his claim that Jesus is definitely risen from the dead. And he says, the obvious thing is, check me out, there's 500 people who've met with the risen Jesus. So at the time of his writing, that's what he could say. But he's also keen to make sense of it, and particularly this challenge that's been sent to him, I think. What kind of body can you have in resurrection? And certainly Jesus' kind of body is just plain confusing when you read about it. And so I'm just inviting you to join me in happy confusion, because I delight in being confused over all this. Let's start with Paul's illustrations from the universe. He's not saying it's an act of nature, resurrection. He's saying, but there are processes in nature which help get us started, which put you on the right page, which put you in the ballpark, which get you thinking. And actually, if, as we do, we recognize that nature is not an accident of its own doing, but is a purposeful thing, that the universe exists on purpose, deliberately, it's a creation, then it pays to think about, well, where's it going then? And why isn't it working better? And will it ever work better? And things like that. So all those are kind of questions are wrapped up in what Paul is saying. But his point is really very simple. His point is this: when we look at nature, you'll see a certain process at work in God's creation. So the flies, my glamorous assistants, they actually began life as eggs, little soft eggs, tiny little ones. They had no legs, no wings, no antennae, they didn't buzz, they didn't land on my head. They just sat there being eggs, except what was going on inside was absolutely phenomenally, outstandingly amazing. Well, let's go to birds, which you can now hear the blackcaps, I think. Birds, you see, we talk about a bird hatching from an egg, and that can slightly mislead us as to what's happening. All that's left behind is the eggshell and a few bits of membrane and a few little bits else. Basically, the egg turns into the bird. The egg is the bird. It's just got a shell it won't need once it's ready to hatch. But the egg becomes the bird. You may see orange tip or peacock butterflies or some of the other species zipping past us during this recording, I don't know. But they do it even more spectacularly, go from egg to caterpillar. That's a one body change, and then from caterpillar to adult butterfly is another one. And what goes on in that metamorphosis is absolutely staggering. And the plants, which you can see behind me, all began. Oh, there are a few exceptions if you look closely at the mosses and so, but they all began life as a seed, and they've grown into the plant that we most readily recognize and call plant. But in fact, they were the same individual when they were seeds. So we would know now something that Paul did not know about, called DNA. And we know that the seed not only contains the nutrients to get growth started when it's time to germinate, but the seed contains the data, the information to form that particular tree. Not any tree, that tree. And that tree is a unique individual, and it's the same unique individual when it was a seed and when it's now in its tree form. It's the same one. Well, Paul's point is just that in another version, which still makes perfect sense to me, is that it's not only DNA that holds the information that makes that tree, and that makes you who you are, your DNA, but that information, in fact more, is held in the mind of God. And so it is quite sensible to think that the information needed to have a new form, to have resurrection, is in fact held by the Creator exactly for that purpose. Now, all around me, another way of looking at a beautiful woodland scene is a battleground, because all these individual plants are fighting for their place. They're fighting for light, they're fighting for nutrients, they're fighting for pollinators, they're fighting for all the things that enable them to live and give rise to the next generation. It's a place of struggle. Now, I love it. To me, it's full of peace and tranquility, but it's actually just a very, very slow struggle for life and a future. St. Paul, who uses this illustration from nature of one kind of body in nature, it's different from any other kind of body, it's unique, and then also one kind of body can take a new kind of body like plants do, still retaining the uniqueness of the individual. St. Paul says something else to his friends in Rome this time, Romans chapter 8. He says, there is a struggle, And it's obvious. It's obvious to any of us. You know, this Easter is a time of sadness over war in the world, over refugee systems, and over lots and lots of issues right now. There's a struggle going on. I mean, grief, what puts you in a boat to cross the channel when you don't know how to handle a boat and so on? It's a struggle. Life is a struggle. Ukraine is in struggle. You're in struggle. I'm in struggle. We're always in struggle of one sort or another. Paul says that the world struggles, but think of that as the struggle of giving birth. Because out of this struggling form is to come a form that is a new life out of the old. That instead of battle and death and competition will come peace and justice and goodness and beauty and life that death cannot terminate. That's the point. And God's work on nature, my nature, your nature, the trees around me, nature as a whole, God's work to rescue, to ensure that the new life that has possibilities here actually does emerge. The Bible has a word for that rescue of you and me and everything else. It's called salvation. It means to save. And the good news of Jesus is not just I can show you how to live a better life that's nicer to other people, but then in actual fact, when you start living that better for other people life, better for the planet life, you yourself are becoming alive to your own rescue, your own salvation. You're becoming more the right you, the you that is fulfilled and beautiful and staggering and wonderful and has eternity in you. So God's intervention is known as salvation. Good Friday focuses that upon the cross of Christ, where Jesus was executed by the powers of this struggling world, because they were in struggle, and he challenged the greed that we cling to, the false securities that we have, the political systems, the religious systems, all the systems and all the stuff. And he challenges it all, and so the world crucifies him. The resurrection declares that very act of rejection was actually God's act of saving. And Easter Day is the celebration of the emerging of the new life of Christ, who joined us in this body, in this world, and who is then risen from the grave, as Paul calls it, the first fruits, the first one to rise. But we are to follow, and God is to renew his creation. I hope this perspective will do for you what it does for me. I look at the world and I hate its pain. I'm distressed by its struggles. I'm disappointed by its aggressions and its selfishness. And I find those things in me too. And yet, I find that my spirit is lifted to know that my Saviour is risen from the dead, the first fruits, the promise of what is to come. As Paul says, know for sure that just as there's a seed that becomes a plant, so this current order is like seed, and there is a new order coming that is comparable to plant that has emerged from seed, and that you yourself are invited to be part of that, not just at some undisclosed point in the future, but starting right now as a new creation in Christ. God bless your Easter celebrations and your week ahead and the rest of your life with that kind of transforming hope, because it makes a difference as you face whatever it is that is in front of you. God bless you.